Bioware is one of the most misunderstood gaming studios. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, that many people assume that Bioware is a studio where they make tabletop RPGs. Now, this isn't a completely untrue statement. Bioware does make a form of tabletop RPGs, but the type they make is one more structured, where the player and the DM are all there for the story, and not to do whatever. But many people assume that is what Bioware is trying to do, to make that kind of tabletop RPG, where you can make any type of protagonist, make any kind of choice, like choosing who to kill or just killing everyone. But Bioware has never been like that, not even with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. Bioware throughout their history has always controlled what the player can and can't do, so let's go through that. Let's explore what Bioware actually is trying to do. Now, I just want to clarify that the people I'm talking about who don't understand Bioware are people who seem to fail to understand what they are. I'm not referring to the people who want them to be different, because they acknowledge what Bioware actually is, but want them to change. But Bioware isn't just misunderstood on what their games are even trying to do, but they are also misunderstood by this subset of gamers who think diversity in video games is an issue, such as with the recent rise of Dragon Age Veilguard, woke, gone broke type of things, but we'll get back to that later. So let's go through how people misunderstand Bioware in what games they're trying to make as a studio. And Bioware has always used the RPG genre to tell stories through it. The choices the players make aren't for them, they are informed by themes, characters, the world, and story. There are choices that Bioware does offer the player that is just for the player, but it is oftentimes that their choices are informed, as I said before, by themes, characters, the world, and the story. A big issue many people have with Bioware is the curated voiced protagonist, saying that it limits role-playing and choices and dialogue options, which is true. A curated voiced protagonist does limit role-playing choices and dialogue options, because a curated voiced protagonist is a character separate from the player. They will act differently and only have dialogue options relevant to them. The issue here is that people think Bioware has wandered from what they used to do or are failing at making that kind of RPG. Now, that latter is a lot more of a broader issue, where many RPG fans have the assumption that all RPGs are trying to be the same, because to them a good RPG is one where the player has a lot of freedom in what they can do. But this isn't correct. What an RPG isn't some narrow definition, it's a wide one. Back on topic, people who think that Bioware should make more silent blank slate protagonists, but looking through any of their games reveals that that's not really what they've done. Bioware, since Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, has always had curated protagonists. Not a voiced one, mind you, but it is clear that Bioware controls who the protagonist is or what they can do. Baldur's Gate 1 and 2's main character is Gorian's ward and a Balespawn. The game often describes your relationship with Gorian as personal. Now, the player can decide on if they liked or disliked Gorian, but they couldn't decide if the relationship existed between them at all. That was up to Bioware, and the player couldn't decide on whether to be a Balespawn or not. That choice was made for them. And that is true for the rest of their games. Revan from KOTOR 1 is literally the character who saved the Republic from the Mandalorians and became the Dark Lord. The Spirit Monk from Jade Empire was part of an order who took care of spirits, and their absence has made those spirits all over the Empire rise from the dead and start killing people. Shepard from Mass Effect, quite obvious, but just to quickly explain, regardless of your chosen background, is a human who cares and wants to further humanity's goals. These paths that they can take either through a Paragon or a Renegade route. And even the Warden from Dragon Age Origins. Each of the 6 Origins have their own defined backstories and relationships. All of them either had predefined backstories, relationships, and sometimes personalities. Sure, there is a range of backstories, relationships, and personalities the player could choose from, but all of them were made by Bioware. All of these characters' predefined backstories, relationships, and sometimes personalities have been used to enhance the storytelling abilities of those stories. And how the RPG mechanics are used for the storytelling is expressing the different themes by making choices. In my previous videos, I talk about why Bioware does this. The basic idea is that a curated protagonist can be used in the story more than a blank slate protagonist. This manifests in all their games. Revan embracing the light side or the dark side has a lot of meanings. One of them could mean that the Revan embracing the light side is them as their default state, but a dark side Revan could be the lingering personality of their former self, and this gets shaken up at the mid-game reveal that you're actually the Dark Lord, which could change Revan from a light side to a dark side or vice versa, or it could strengthen their alignment. For the Warden, their backstories are used often to add conflict and tension to the quests and story. If you play as a Dwarven noble, there is a different tension to the Paragon of Her Kind quest compared to playing as the Dwarven commoner, which brings a different tension to the quest. Those different tensions center around the use of the Warden's backstories. A Dwarven noble would be biased on who they would choose to be King of Orzammar. Balin tried to kill them, and Haramon tried to prevent them from being exiled, while the Dwarven commoner views Balin better because he is taking care of their sister and nephew, while Haramon is the same traditionalist that kept the caste list down. And for Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, the player was Gorine's ward and a Balespawn, which is used in the story to create tension for the player. After the big reveal of finding out you're a Balespawn, all your previous actions and future actions get recontextualized. Being lawful good character is done despite the player's Balespawn nature. What if there was a blank slate protagonist? There would be no backstory other than what the player could give them. The tension and conflict wouldn't be so personal, it would come from somewhere else. So, as I've explained, it does seem like Bioware has never really made a blank slate protagonist or has been trying to do it. Their games are just too full of curated protagonists for them to have always tried to make a blank slate protagonist. They were never the type of studio where the player making as many different types of characters is a priority. Bioware always controlled who the player character was. This also extends to Bioware voicing their protagonist. Giving them a voice adds another layer for the story to use. Within Dragon Age Origins, there are many examples of the Warden not given speeches because it would come across awkward. Selecting a dialogue option to then have an immediate response of cheers would come across as comical, which means those big moments can't be done with the player character. But with a voice protagonist, it is possible. It adds weight to the scenes, it makes them feel more attached to the world, and that is what Bioware has always tried to do. People misunderstood that Bioware never made or was trying to make a blank slate protagonists. Bioware has always controlled what choices the player can make. The player could never do whatever they want. In Dragon Age Origins, the player could never kill whoever they want. For example, the player couldn't kill Zathrian the first time they met. Bioware restricted the player from doing that because they want the player to understand Zathrian first before making the choice to kill him. The context of who he is needed to exist to A, make an informed choice, and B, to make the story better, and the player killing whoever they want can get in the way of that. The only time Bioware allowed the player to kill anyone they want is in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, but after that game, Bioware restricted who the player can kill. And beyond just killing whoever you want, Bioware only allows conflicts to be resolved in the way they want. The only way for the player to become king or queen is by playing a human noble and then romancing Alistair or Nora. You can't have a same-sex romance, nor can you be of the monarch as an elf or a dwarf. There is no other way to be the monarch. Bioware made it this way because it can give the world a lot more agency than the player, making the world feel a lot more believable. If the player could just do whatever they want, they aren't just taking agency away from other characters, they're taking agency away from the world itself because they can bend and break it however they see fit. This is what Bioware has always been trying to do, even with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. People often imply that old Bioware allowed you to make many different types of choices, but in reality Bioware offered those choices for the reasons I listed before. The reason was never to give the player as many choices as they want, but to give the story, protagonist, or themes the number of choices it needed. But that's just the game itself. People also often misunderstand Bioware as having been non-woke before. With a lot of videos about Veilguard coming out, so many people are making the wildest claims that they have gone woke, which implies that they weren't woke to begin with, when in reality they were always woke. Also, let's just cut to the chase. When people mean woke, what they actually mean is progressive in a political sense. So I'll just be using that word. Since Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Bioware has always been progressive in how they tell the stories. Challenges to authority, and authority being a corruptive force. In KOTOR 1, the Jedi not intervening in the conflict led many Jedi to be disillusioned with the Order, turning them to the dark side. In Dragon Age Origins, Loghain letting Kaelin die because he didn't want to form an alliance with Olay is him abusing his power for his own personal wants. Bioware has always been progressive, and in a diversity sense, Bioware has also made their games very diverse. Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 have a lot of female companions who aren't just the stereotypical kind normal seen in video games at the time. There are some companions like that, but for the most part it is very different from what was seen at the time. They were just people. Bioware has also been one of the first studios to include a gay romance in their games with KOTOR 1's Juhani. Despite what many people say, Bioware has always been progressive since their early days. What they are doing now with the dev is simply the logical conclusion they have always been going towards. I made a community post asking people what they think people misunderstand about Bioware. I incorporated some of those comments into the video itself, but I still want to cover the rest, to show my appreciation for people commenting and to see what others think they are misunderstandings of Bioware. I'll also comment on whether I agree or disagree with them, so, well, let's get into it. One of the odd criticisms I've seen far too much is the claim that all the long-time DA devs are new. This is just blatantly false. Now, do I agree that the layoffs suck? Absolutely, but to elaborate that all of them are gone is just lying. Just the two examples are creative director John Epler, who's been there for 17 years, and lead writer Patrick Reeks, who's been there for 19 years. So they've been there since Dragon Age Origins. The false claim that all the veterans are gone is being used as proof that the game cannot possibly be good. Sigh. I do agree with this as well, because one thing that I think is very important to point out is that a lot of these people will lament Bioware having terrible writers. Many people will say Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition had awful writers. Yet when David Gaider leaves in, I think, 2016, they will all go about saying, wow, Bioware has lost one of the greatest writers, even though he was the lead writer on Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition. If those games have bad writing, does that imply that David Gaider is a bad writer? There's this weird disconnect with some people saying that it sucks that people left and BioWare has no good talent left, but then also criticizing the good talent that's in BioWare, but only mentioning them when they leave. It's an odd thing. There's a larger issue in gaming in general, but I'm really sick of people saying that they are using forced diversity or wokeness in games, when it's trying to be inclusive to a modern audience. BioWare games have always touched on deep themes. This is nothing new. Now, I did incorporate this sort of idea into my video as well, and my thoughts are very clear on it. The idea that BioWare has been harmed somehow by EA, or that their failures are somehow EA's fault. BioWare itself has admitted that EA has been carrying BioWare over its failures for many years, and there wouldn't even be a Dragon Age series right now if it had not been for EA. Sure, EA wanted a Dragon Age sequel in 18 months, but BioWare didn't approach the project correctly, nor did they press EA for significantly more development. Now, I don't particularly agree with this comment a lot, and this is a weird misunderstanding that a lot of people have as well. EA is definitely the big problem with BioWare. BioWare has their own issues, being the fact that they won't reuse tools and assets, and there is this weird schism between the Dragon Age and the Mass Effect team, but there is no way in my mind that they are a more problem to themselves than EA is to BioWare. EA basically forced BioWare to use the Frostbite engine, and while this guy says BioWare didn't approach the project correctly in 18 months, is laughable, because they did approach it the best way they can. You can't make a sequel to Dragon Age Origins in 18 months. You can't do that. That's why they had to scale it down significantly. In 18 months, you can't do a lot with a game, and EA didn't want to give BioWare more time because Dragon Age 2 needed to fill the slot that Star Wars The Old Republic left. They couldn't ask for more time because EA wanted a Dragon Age game to fill that gap. There was no way they could do it. That BioWare devs don't know who their audience is, as if they don't actually focus group just make the crap on the fly, because they won't go back to crunchy overhead tactical combat and scantily clad waifus. Every single Dragon Age game has had a different combat and a different art style. A lot of the folks are seen through the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia, where nothing will ever be like their first playthrough of Origins. I have those rose-colored glasses too. It was sure amazing, but I do not think that the subsequent games that follow that formula are some kind of pointed insult directed at me personally from BioWare developers. Devs don't want to make the same game over and over again. They want to push out, see what they can do, and where the creativity can lead. The instances that BioWare must remain true to combat and art style that is 15 years old is madness. No studio could survive that. Now, I am on two mindsets of these comments. I do agree with them, but also I do kind of disagree with them. I agree with them in the sense that people think that Bioware just doesn't know their audience. They do know their audience. Their audience, for a large part, really just likes the story, the characters, and the world. A lot of Origins discourse earlier on was that it's okay gameplay, because a lot of people who played Origins didn't really play it for the gameplay. They played it for the story, the characters, and the world. But I do disagree, because I do think there is value in having a consistent art style and gameplay. Bioware, like other companies, have the same flaws when it comes to AAA game development. It isn't wise to put Bioware on a pedestal just to quickly knock them down after the Mass Effect 3 ending drama, then immediately put The Witcher 3 devs on top just to quickly knock them off with the release of Cyberpunk. The most sad and unfortunate truth is that Bioware is forced to use the EA engine, which is the sports games that take priority. Only now in today's market, companies like Capcom and Resident Evil franchise and the other games are winning gamers over with a refocus on single-player games. Now, I do agree with this as well. There is this weird issue that a lot of people just constantly want to have the favorite AAA darling, and then when they have an issue, they just knock them down. It's an odd thing. Bioware is often misunderstood for many reasons. People don't understand what kind of RPGs they are making, nor do they understand that Bioware has always been a progressive studio. Now, this isn't to say that all the issues people have with Bioware are misunderstandings. There are actually issues with Bioware, such as inconsistencies with their games and other issues that can be contributed to EA or people not understanding their games. But I do want to discuss that in a future video. And yeah, thanks so much for watching the video if you've gotten this far. I wanted to talk about this sort of thing because when I see a lot of people talk about Bioware, I don't particularly understand how they can come to the conclusions, because it's like you need to have played their games, and when you've played their games you can see that they're just not what you're trying to say. Again, not that there aren't any issues with Bioware, but that the issues that people seem to think that Bioware have are just not something that not true to reality, you know. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, perhaps consider liking and also subscribing. Additionally, if you want to talk about, you know, hey, maybe I got something wrong, maybe there are more misunderstandings that I didn't mention, please leave a comment down below. And yeah, thanks for watching.